Hey, Savvy Social Workers. Let's get into some Unit 1 Aswb exam practice questions. Okay. A social worker meets with a 40-year-old client who recently divorced her husband. The couple has 2 children who live with the client and see their father every other weekend. The client reports feeling overwhelmed and more exhausted now that she has to care for the children, primarily by herself. In assessing the situation, the social worker should be aware that the client is most likely to. So, the first thing I want to point out about these human behavior questions is that you have to look at them not just from a matching an age with a stage or an age or a stage with the behavior, those things. You have to look at it from a reasoning perspective. So they give you certain behaviors or certain situations that they expect you to be knowledgeable of the content, yes, but also be able to reasonably apply that content. Okay, so in this situation, we are meeting with a 40-year-old. So, of course, we want to always pay attention to who our client is, especially when there's an age involved. So, we're meeting with a 40-year-old. Meets with denotes that we are in the beginning, but I will tell you a lot of times for the human behavior, human development questions, the stage is not as important as it is with the clinical application questions or the clinical intervention questions, okay? So we have a 40-year-old client who recently divorced from her husband, okay? This is going to be our initial situation or our presenting problem. The couple has 2 children who live with the client and see their father every other weekend. So that's line up information. The client reports feeling overwhelmed and more exhausted now that she has to care for the children primarily by herself. That is going to be our main issue that is happening in the moment that we need to focus on and address. So this is going to be our priority issue. Now, what is the question asking us? In assessing this situation, the social worker should be aware that the client is most likely to. Okay, so now we're assessing her situation, the fact that she reports feeling overwhelmed and more exhausted. What is this client most likely to do or to be? Okay, so that is what the question is asking. What would make the most sense for this client, being that she is overwhelmed and exhausted now that she is having to primarily care for the children? Is it A, would this client be more likely to use more authoritarian but less consistent punishments with her children? Is this something that she's most likely to do, being that she's feeling overwhelmed and exhausted? That is definitely something I would pause on and see what the other answers look like. B, believe she is an inadequate parent. Is it common, or would she most likely believe that she's an inadequate parent because she feels overwhelmed and more exhausted? That is plausible, so we're going to pause that one as well. Remember, when we have these most questions, we are trying to figure out what makes the most sense, but a lot of times I will tell you that majority of the answer choices will be correct. That's why you have to pick the one that is the most correct. So that's what we're looking at. So since one of the strategies I like to use for most questions is, since we pause both A and B, we want to say, because we said both of these are plausible, so we want to just take it from here and say, now which one of these is more likely or is the most likely? Is it A, she's going to use more authoritarian but less consistent punishment, or is B more likely than A? Okay, is she going to believe that she is an inadequate parent? Okay, so just because she's feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, to me, does not denote that she's going to believe that she is an inadequate parent. It's probably going to be the opposite of that, because she's overwhelmed and exhausted from making sure that she is being, the best parent that she can be to her kids. So out of the two, I will eliminate B, because I don't think that she will be most likely more than using the authoritarian parent style. And remember, the authoritarian parent style is the more strict parent style, where you just give the person the rules and expect them to be followed, but less consistent punishment, meaning that she will give them the rules, expect them to be followed, but then she will probably not be consistent with punishing them, because she is overwhelmed and exhausted. That's just what my thought processes are. Or either she can be overly permissive. Is she most likely to be overly permissive? So these are two opposite answers, and y'all know how I feel about when they give you two answers that are in direct opposition. I feel like one of them is usually the right answer. So either this client can be extremely strict with her kids because she's tired, or she can be overly permissive. So either being extremely strict but being less consistent with the punishment, or just letting them do whatever they want to do, because she feels overwhelmed and more exhausted. Okay, so now these are two very good answers, but according to research, in the initial period following divorce, the mother, who usually has physical custody of the children, is frequently socially isolated, lonely, and often experiences a decline in income. Following divorce, parents experience emotional distress and changes in functioning that often include diminished capacity to parent. Authoritarian parents set rigid rules with no explanation and expect their children to obey them without question or face severe punishment. This could be a result of her feeling overwhelmed and exhausted with her life situation. However, in this situation, because she's overwhelmed and exhausted with having to primarily care for the kids by herself, she will probably be more permissive and just say, hey, you know what, just do what y'all feel like doing right now. Because setting those rules is, going to be something that she will want to do or will even try to do, but having the energy to enforce them is just probably going to be too much for her, dealing with her emotional state right now. So that is what leads me to the answer being C. She will probably, during this time, be overly permissive of just kind of letting her kids do whatever. So we're going to go with C for this one. Next question. A client's husband dies from complications related to COPD. The client, who does not have COPD, begins experiencing medical symptoms similar to those her husband had. Which of the following defense mechanisms describe the situation? Okay, so the client's husband dies from complications related to COPD. That is the initial situation. Okay, remember, we're looking at these to reason, right, in order to pick our answer. So the client who doesn't have COPD, she begins experiencing medical symptoms similar to what her husband had. Which of the following defense mechanisms describe this situation? Is it introjection? Introjection is definitely a possibility because that does involve internalizing the qualities of another object or person. Okay, reaction formation. Reaction formation is when a person pretty much adopts the opposite of their unwanted impulses. So usually that is kind of like you like someone, but then you act like you hate them. And so in this case, that does not seem to be what's going on, because the biggest issue here is after her husband dies from these complications, she doesn't have it, but she begins to experience medical symptoms similar to those of what he had. Is that regression? Okay, so regression involves a partial or symbolic return to a more infantile pattern of thinking. So that means you're going back to a previous stage in your life, usually back to childhood. You're regressing back to childhood, which has nothing to do with the situation either. Now, repression. What is repression, and is she repressing something here? Okay. Repression is when a person banishes or tries to forget about or get rid of any unacceptable ideas or impulses from their conscious. So here, is she trying to repress something or get rid of something? Does not relate. So in this case, the defense mechanism is going to be introjection. When this is used as a defense mechanism, it serves to remove the distinction between the person and the introjected object. In this case would be the person, which is her husband. Introjecting a love object, or in this case her husband, like I said, can allow a person to avoid an undesired awareness of separateness or a threat of loss. So because she lost her husband to COPD, now she's starting to experience some of the similar symptoms. This is a way of a defense mechanism of helping her to just avoid the reality of the loss. So this is very well going to be introjection, because she's internalizing those qualities. Even though she does not have COPD, she's internalizing those qualities. A social worker is working with a family who wants to ensure that their adolescent daughter develops a healthy sense of autonomy. This is most likely to happen if the parents. So basically, this whole first sentence is our focus sentence that we are looking to reason with to answer our question. So you have a family who wants to ensure that their adolescent daughter develops a healthy sense of autonomy. This is most likely to happen if the parents, A, set and enforce clear, consistent limits on her behavior so that she learns appropriate self-control. Is this going to ensure that she has a healthy sense of autonomy if her parents are setting the limits for her behavior? Absolutely not, because we know that autonomy has a lot to do with independence. Let her make decisions on her own and step in only when she makes a poor decision. We're going to pause that one. C, retain some necessary control, but give her more decision-making authority than she had before. Definitely going to pause that one as well. D, use a power assertive disciplinary style. We know that when we're talking about autonomy, we do not want to exert power assertive discipline towards the child. So either when we're trying to ensure that this child develops a healthy sense of autonomy, either we can let her make decisions on her own and step in only when she makes a poor decision, or we can retain some necessary control but give her more decision-making authority than she had before. Okay, so first of all, this is, like I said, you don't just want to match the age with the stage and say, okay, well, she's a teenager, we want to, let her make her own decisions and, help her out when she falls in need, right? You got to be able to reason with this because she is an adolescent, right? An adolescent is most likely to develop a healthy sense of autonomy if her parents give her more decision-making authority than she had before, okay? Because in a democratic family structure, for example, the parents retain final decision-making authority but allow their adolescent to participate equally with them when decisions are being made, okay? Looking at B, an adolescent continues to need boundaries and limits while learning about decision making. So this is why the answer is going to be C, because just letting her make her own decisions and only stepping in when she makes a poor one is not really teaching her autonomy, because she still needs boundaries and limits in her decision making as an adolescent, because we know that, her brain is still not even fully developed for her to be out just making all the decisions, on her own. But we do want to give her some decision making power. We don't want to, set all the limits for her or use power to control her. But we also don't want her to make all of the decisions on her own right now. So we want to, kind of let her make some of the decisions, but under our leadership, pretty much, and guiding her as she makes these decisions, but just giving her a little more leeway to do that. This will foster the greater sense of autonomy with her, because she's able to make decisions safely, because she has her parents' guidance as well and not just on her own. So I'm stressing that to make sure you understand that that's why B is not the answer. And also, just only coming in when she makes a poor decision will foster that mindset of being rescued. Oh, I know I can go out here and do what I want, because when I mess up, my parents are going to run to my rescue. And so that doesn't really foster autonomy either. That is fostering a little bit more of codependence and irresponsibility in a certain aspect. A 13-year-old boy was sexually abused by a cousin for several years. The boy is least likely to exhibit which of the following as a consequence of this abuse. Okay, so we have a 13-year-old boy who was sexually abused by his cousin for several years. That is our main issue. So he's 13, and this has happened for several years. Now the question is asking, the boy is least likely to exhibit which of the following as a consequence. So let's look at, instead of least, let's flip that around and see which one of these consequences will the boy be most likely to exhibit and get rid of them. And whatever is left standing will be the least likely. So is he more likely to exhibit frequent aggression as a consequence? This is possible, so we'll pause it. Poor peer relationships. This is definitely possible, so we'll pause it as well. Well, when I say pause it, so that means it can possibly be the most aggressive, or being more likely to exhibit. So now, if we're looking between poor relationships and frequent aggression, which one of these are more likely to be? Is it going to be he's going to be more frequently aggressive, or have poor peer relationships, right? So that's one way we can look at it. We continue to the other answer choices. Withdraw into a fantasy world. Is this something that he is most likely to do? And remember, I'm saying most likely because it's just easier to understand, well, for me anyway, to weed out. And I do know that children that are sexually abused, one of the symptoms is they do kind of just go off into their own little fantasy world. So I know that this is something that he is more likely to do. So we could definitely scratch through this one. And then psychosomatic illness is another common one. So I know that he won't be least likely to do this, because these are very common. So out of the two, I know that poor peer relationships could be common if a kid is sexually abused, as well as a kid can be frequently aggressive. But we're looking for the one that will be the least likely, he'd be least likely to exhibit. So which one of these will affect him more? We will eliminate that one since we're looking for the least likely. Is it going to be the aggression or the poor peer relationships? Okay, so looking at this, among the typical behavioral indicators found in children who have been sexually abused are the following. Okay, so this is going to be a list of symptoms of when a child has been sexually abused. Okay, and that is going to be appears to mistrust or fear adults, exhibits a sudden unexplained change in behavior like depression or anxiety, exhibits fear states such as night terrors, exhibits regressive behaviors, withdraws into a fantasy world, has psychosomatic illness, engages in delinquent behavior like truancy or running away, is socially isolated or has poor peer relationships. So it's saying here he has poor peer relationships is likely, so we can go ahead and get rid of that. And then exhibits overly sophisticated knowledge about sex, is promiscuous or overly sexualized, is unwilling to participate in physical activities, has attempted suicide, and uses alcohol or drugs. Now, none of these, I went through this list because not only did I want you to know the signs and symptoms of child sexual abuse, but none of these really stated aggression. And that is simply because aggression, it could be present, but it's more often a consequence of a child that's being physically abused, not necessarily sexually abused. So because this is about sexual abuse and they're asking you which one is least likely, so he's more likely to have poor peer relationships than he is to be aggressive. So if he was getting physically abused, it would be more likely that he would have aggression. So I took my time with that one because, again, y'all, they ask these sexual abuse questions in so many different ways on the exam, but the underlying thread of it is making sure you know what the signs and symptoms look like. So if you need to pause and rewind and replay and take a note of those symptoms that I listed, those are the primary symptoms of child sexual abuse. And just remember that as aggression could be one of those signs, it is not one of the more likely signs. That is more along the lines of child physical abuse. Next unit 1 question. A social worker is preparing to terminate therapy with a client who has successfully met all of his treatment goals. During the termination phase, the client begins displaying some of the symptoms he exhibited at the beginning of treatment. What should the social worker do? So again, we're talking about this client's behavior. So you are preparing to terminate therapy with a client who has successfully met all of his treatment goals. That is the initial situation. Now, during this termination phase, which lets me know we're at the end of the helping process with this client. This client begins displaying some of the symptoms he exhibited at the beginning of treatment. What should the social worker do? Like, why would he even be doing this? What's going on, and what should the social worker do? Should the social worker review the client's treatment goals and progress? So yes, this is something that we do at the end during the termination phase, but is that going to address the fact that he's began displaying some of the symptoms that he exhibited at the beginning of treatment? No, it's not. So we're going to eliminate that. Remember, it can fit the phase of the process, but your goal with these questions is to answer and intervene according to what the primary focus or the priority problem is. Okay, and so this is what the priority is. So are we going to, as a social worker, understand that the client is using a defense mechanism? This is definitely possible, and it is common when it's coming time for a termination of the therapeutic relationship. So we're going to pause that. C, continue treating the client. Is this something we want to do because all of a sudden he is displaying does this mean that he's not ready for termination and we want to continue treating him? I am going to say no, we're not going to just out the bat continue treating him, because this is very common for clients to get nervous when the therapeutic relationship is ending. So as you know, a termination approaches, a client may experience the loss of that support from that therapeutic relationship and may feel like it's, may have feelings of it being uncomfortable. And so this may produce a regression to or the reappearance of the presenting symptoms. So if we can acknowledge and address that this is a defense mechanism, that is where we're going to start. Does that necessarily mean that this client still needs to be in treatment? No, it doesn't. But what we should do and what we should acknowledge is that, we understand that, okay, this is a typical defense mechanism. He's already successfully met all his treatment goals, so they told us that. So to continue treating him would definitely not be what we want to do. We would just want to make sure that we understand and address that this is a defense mechanism, because this may happen even when the treatment has been successful. The psychodynamic interpretation of this would be that the client is using a defense mechanism to cope with his discomfort of being discharged. Okay, the defense mechanism served to defend against unacceptable unconscious impulses or drives, or to keep them from reaching awareness. So he is not really trying to accept that it's time to terminate or it's time to end the therapeutic relationship. So with this one, our understanding of, this being a defense mechanism versus continuing to treat him because it seems like he's regressing, we can better deal with our client in this situation from the understanding of what it is versus trying to just restart treatment with him all over again. So this is, again, acknowledging, knowing and acknowledging what these different types of human behavior look like, especially when it comes to clients using defense mechanisms, which are very common. A patient in psychoanalysis begins to be aware of repressed material. Which of the following is most likely to occur as a result? So we have a patient that is going through psychoanalysis treatment, and he begins to be aware of repressed material. What is most likely going to occur as a result of this patient becoming aware of this repressed material? So like for me, I like to simplify, visualize this in my mind, and just kind of simplify what it means. So for me, I know that psychoanalysis takes us back to places like childhood where we have repressed certain memories. So think about when a client begins to uncover or become aware of certain memories that they had, seemingly forgot about. What is most likely to occur as a result of them uncovering these repressed memories? Okay, is it the patient will acquire an emotionally meaningful insight? That's possible, so we're going to pause that. B, the patient will regress to a safer stage of development. Well, if the patient has uncovered some repressed material or memories, then I think repressing from this point will probably not be where they go. So for that reason, not repressing, regression is probably will not be where they go. Simply because regression occurs when a person retreats to an earlier stage, or like it says, a safer stage of development, and behaves in ways characteristic of that stage. So does uncovering this childhood issue that happened mean that he's going to go back, regress to that stage and start acting like that? It absolutely does not. So I'm going to eliminate that. C, the patient will use defense mechanisms to manage anxiety elicited by the material. Okay, so we begin to uncover some uncomfortable things from childhood or from the past, right, that the client had totally forgot about. Will this patient acquire this as an emotionally meaningful insight? Or will he use defense mechanisms to try to manage the anxiety that kind of comes along with uncovering this? So we know that it's going to be very uncommon as well as uncomfortable when this stuff comes back to the surface. So according to the psychoanalytic theory, becoming aware of previously unconscious material arouses anxiety, which the patient will attempt to reduce by using defense mechanisms. Awareness of unconscious material does not automatically lead to insight. So the most likely to occur will be that the client will use defense mechanisms to manage the anxiety that also comes along with uncovering these past materials or these past memories. Okay, savvy social workers, so that's going to be it for this video. I wanted to bring you some questions by unit just so you can start getting an understanding of how to look at the different types of questions by units to see that they're not answered the same way. So I know a lot of people want to be able to use the helping process to eat a pie today or whatever, but as you can see, we didn't necessarily need that for these unit 1 types of questions. We are looking to know the content. You have to know these defense mechanisms. You have to know these theories. You have to know the ages and the stages, but you have to take it a step further and be able to reason with how they fit into the situation. So just like this question that's up here, you have to know about psychoanalysis and how that works. You have to know the role that defense mechanisms plays in different situations in a client's life. So you are looking to study this content and know this content, but also know how to reasonably apply this content and not just match ages with stages or simple situations to defense mechanisms. So I like to think of unit 1 questions as thinking you really have to think outside the box. For me, this unit is the hardest to study for because there's so much material that you have to process and you have to know how to actually, apply that that content in a reasonable way. So any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. I hope this video was helpful for you. And again, thank y'all so much for y'all support and being here. And let's continue to get those passes the savvy way.